Montana Territory, autumn of 1879. Just outside the town of Red Rock, cold wind bit the skin and shame burned hotter than fire. Lorna DeWitt stood barefoot in the dust, dress torn at the hem, clutching a threadbare shawl around her slender shoulders. Her father's voice still echoed in her ears, loud, final, cruel. "You ain't my daughter no more." She had not cried when he spat those words. She had not begged. She had simply turned and walked because there was nothing left to say. Her belly was flat again now, but her kin had not forgiven what had happened months back, nor what she had chosen. She had refused to name the man. She had refused to end the pregnancy. And when the baby came too early and did not survive, they said she had brought God's judgment on them all. She had buried her son herself in the church's back field. No marker. Only a stone she had carved with a W. Now, with the wind tugging at her skirts and no place to go, she walked toward the wide open prairie like it might swallow her whole. Dust kicked up behind a wagon on the road ahead. She froze. Her instinct was to hide, but there were no bushes, no trees, just the empty road and a cowboy driving a buckboard hitched to two paint mares. He slowed when he saw her, reining in until the wagon creaked to a halt. The man wore a broad hat low over his brow and a sheepskin coat. He looked young, maybe 28, but the lines around his eyes said he had seen more than most. His name, she would learn later, was Heath Dalton. "You all right, miss?" he asked, voice low and careful. She looked him straight on. "I got no place to go." He nodded once, not pressing. "You hungry?" She hesitated, then nodded. He reached behind the seat, pulled out a cloth bundle, and held it out without stepping down. "Biscuits and cheese, not much, but it will hold you." She took it with both hands, fingers shaking. "I'm headed west of town," he said. "Got a small ranch out there. Ain't much, just cattle and quiet. You can ride along if you want." Lorna stared at him, unsure what kind of man offered help to a girl cast out with nothing but shame on her back. "Why?" she asked. He met her eyes then. "Because you look like you need someone who ain't gonna ask questions you don't want to answer." She climbed into the wagon. Heath's ranch was 3 miles from town, tucked between two hills and surrounded by wind-bent cottonwoods. The house was small but clean, whitewashed wood, a porch, a stove that glowed warm through the windows. He helped her down without touching her. "You can stay in the spare room," he said. "Ain't much in it but a bed. You want to leave in the morning, no one will stop you." She nodded, but her fingers gripped the shawl tighter. Inside was warm, the smell of wood smoke and stew hanging in the air. He poured her a tin cup of coffee and set a bowl in front of her at the table. "Eat." She sat, the chair creaking under her, and for the first time in weeks she cried. Not loud, just silent tears falling into her stew. He did not look away. He just said, "You belong at this table as much as anyone." She looked up at him. "You do not know what I have done." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "I do not need to. You are here. That is enough." The days that followed passed quiet and slow. Lorna rose before dawn, fed the chickens, swept the porch, chopped kindling. She never asked to help, she just did. Heath let her. He rode out to tend cattle and came back late, dust in his hair and saddle creaks in his bones. They spoke little, but when they did, it was soft and simple. One night she asked, "You ever been married?" He shook his head. "No, you?" She smiled, small and sad. "No." He did not ask about the child, but she saw him glance once at the small wooden cross she had carved and placed on the window sill. A W burned into the wood. He did not ask, and she was grateful. A week passed. Then, too, he brought her a basket of sewing things from town. "Figured you might need something to do." She made curtains for the kitchen, repaired his shirts, sewed a new pillowcase for the spare bed. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky burned orange, he stood beside her on the porch, arms resting on the rail. "You thinking of heading on?" he asked. She looked out over the field, watching the horses graze. "I do not want to," she said. He nodded. "Then do not." She turned toward him. "What if people talk?" He looked down at her and his jaw tensed. "Let them. I know who you are." "That is enough for me." Her throat caught. It was not love, yet not quite, but it was the beginning of something strong, something real. And she had not felt that in so long. That night she found him in the barn, brushing down the horses. "I want to stay," she said. He paused, turned. "I want to earn it," she added. "Not just hide here. You are not hiding. You are healing." She stepped closer, heart thudding. "But I want to be more than that." He looked at her, and something in his eyes shifted like a wall coming down. "You already are." Their hands touched then, fingers brushing over the horse's flank. It was not a kiss, not yet, but it was a promise. And for the first time since she buried her baby in the cold dirt, Lorna DeWitt felt like she might have a future, here with him. The first frost came in early October. Thin and glinting, it rimmed the porch rails and stiffened the grass beneath the cottonwoods. Lorna stood at the edge of the field with a pail in one hand, breath clouding in front of her, watching how the sunlight slipped across the low hills. She didn't speak, didn't move, just let the stillness fill her. Heath was repairing a broken fence line down by the south pasture. She could hear the distant rhythm of hammer on wood. He hadn't asked her to join him. He never asked more than she was ready to give. A wagon passed on the road beyond the hill, wheels creaking, a boy waving from the back. Lorna gave a small raise of her hand, then turned inside. She lit the stove, measured flour, set dough to rise. The kitchen held a quiet warmth, the kind that came not from the fire alone but from the steadiness of being needed. Later, Heath stepped in, boots muddy, a small cut across his knuckle. "You didn't wear gloves," she said without looking up from the dough. "I forgot." She rinsed a cloth in cool water and held out her hand. He let her take his, rough and warm, in hers. She wrapped the cut, fingers lingering a moment longer than they needed to. "You're careful with things," he said. "I wasn't always." He didn't ask what she meant. Instead, he pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and laid it on the table. "Brought this from town. Store's hiring someone to keep ledgers. Said they'd take a woman if she could write neat." She looked at the paper. "You think I should go? I think you should do what you want. But if you miss this place when you're in town, you'll know." Lorna studied the print, then set it down. "I'd like to try," he nodded. "Then I'll drive you in tomorrow." She kneaded the dough in silence a moment, then said, "I never knew men who asked what I wanted." "You've only known the wrong kind then." That night, she sat on the porch with her mended shawl around her shoulders. Heath joined her, oil lantern between them. He said, "My ma used to sit just like this. Said dusk was when the world breathed deepest." "She's still living?" "No, fever took her when I was 15. Lorna looked down at her hands. "I birthed my son alone. I held him until he got cold." "I never told anyone that." Heath didn't speak for a long while. Then, quietly, "You don't have to carry that alone, not here." She didn't cry. She didn't need to. It was enough that he knew. When she rose to go inside, she turned and asked, "You want coffee in the morning?" "I do," he said. And the way he said it, it wasn't just about the coffee. The general store sat at the edge of Red Rock's main road, flanked by a smithy and a shuttered cafe that hadn't reopened since spring. Heath tied the team to the rail and helped Lorna down without a word, though his eyes lingered on her gloved hands as they smoothed her coat. She had borrowed it from the rack by the door that morning. It fit a little loose, but held the scent of cedar and old tobacco. Inside, the storekeeper, Mr. Ellsworth, glanced up over his spectacles. He was a lean man with silver hair and a limp that worsened when the weather turned. Lorna stepped forward, quiet but without hesitation. "I came about the bookkeeping," she said. He looked at her, not unkind but measured. You can keep figures. I can read, write, and total columns quicker than most. My mother taught me early. Mr. Ellsworth tapped the counter once with his pencil. I'll give you 3 afternoons a week. You'll sit in back. No gossip, no interruptions. Cash box stays locked unless I'm present. That's agreeable, she said. You start Monday. She thanked him, and Heath tipped his hat before they stepped back into the wind. Heath didn't speak until they were halfway down the road. You didn't mention you were schooled. Lorna pulled her coat tighter. Didn't seem like the sort of thing that counted until today. He glanced at her, his voice low. It counts with me. That evening, while she washed the dishes, he leaned against the doorframe with a length of rope in one hand, working knots into it to keep his fingers busy. I've got a neighbor, old widow named Mrs. Tully. Lives 2 ridges over, keeps bees. She's been asking for someone to help jar and label. I can ride you over come Saturday if you're interested. I'd like that, Lorna said, drying her hands. I never saw a hive up close. He nodded, then hesitated. She's fond of talking. Might ask questions. I'm not afraid of questions, she said, just not always ready for answers. He watched her a moment, then went back to his knots. Later that night, a storm rolled in from the west. The wind howled across the fields, sleet tapping at the windows like fingers searching for warmth. Lorna lit a second oil lamp and placed it on the floor near the door, just in case the chimney drew down wrong. She found Heath outside, pulling a tarp over the woodpile. You'll freeze, she called. He looked back, rain running off his hat brim. Just needed it covered. She stepped down barefoot, the porch slick under her feet. You could have asked. He took the last corner of the tarp and tucked it beneath the logs. Didn't want to trouble you. I'm not company, Heath. No, he said, straightening. You're not. She moved closer, rain misting her lashes. Then stop treating me like you expect me to ride off at any moment. He didn't answer right away. I know you're giving me space, she said. And I'm thankful, but I'm not walking on eggshells. I want to be here, same as you. The wind rattled the barn door, and somewhere down the hill, a horse let out a long breath. Heath reached out and touched her wrist just once, like he was testing whether she'd pull away. She didn't. I don't want to crowd you, he said. You're not. He nodded, jaw tight. Then come inside. She followed him in, her hand finding his sleeve in the dark. They didn't speak again that night. But when she passed him the tin cup of coffee the next morning, her hand brushed his on purpose. And he didn't let go right away. By mid-November, the ice came steady. It layered the troughs and clung to the wire fences, and the cattle moved slower in the mornings, lowing as their breath steamed in the cold. On the Dalton place, time passed in rhythms. Firewood chopped, feed hauled, boots lined at the door by nightfall. Inside, the room smelled of pine smoke and tallow, and the quiet between Lorna and Heath had taken on a new shape, not distance, but comfort. She no longer flinched when he passed behind her to reach for the coffee tin. When they shared meals, her voice came easier, fuller. There were still things she didn't speak aloud, but the silence between them no longer carried weight. That Friday, after she returned from her hours at the store, she found Heath sanding a new rocking chair on the porch. His sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, sawdust clinging to his wrists. She paused at the steps. You make that? He didn't look up. Started it last winter. Figured someone might want a place to sit besides me. She stepped closer, laid her gloved hand on the back rail. It's smooth. Meant to be. If it scrapes the skin, it's not done right. She studied the curve of the armrest. You build all the furniture here, except the bed frames. I ordered those when I first fenced the land. Needed rest before comfort. Lorna traced the edge of the seat with 2 fingers. I'd like to help, if you'll show me. He handed her a scrap of sandpaper without a word, and they worked beside each other until the sun dropped low behind the ridge. That night she lingered in the kitchen while he read at the table, a small oil lamp casting shadows against the wall. "Heath," she said, not turning from the stove, "did you ever think about leaving this place behind?" He set the book down. "Once. Right after the war. I thought maybe I'd head south, maybe into Arizona territory, but something about this land held on." She poured warm water into the basin and scrubbed the pot slowly. "I used to think running would fix things. Now I don't even know where I'd go." "You don't have to know. You're here." She wiped her hands on a rag and faced him. "I want to build something that stays." He stood, the floor creaking beneath his boots. "Then stay with me." She met his gaze, steady and sure. "I'd need more than a roof. I'd need a place of my own in it." He stepped closer, not touching her yet. "Then let's make it yours. I don't want this house without you in it." She looked up at him, her voice soft but firm. "I still carry what happened. It's not gone just because the days are easier." "I know what you carry," he said. "And it hasn't changed what I see when I look at you." Her breath caught in her throat, not from fear, but from the weight of being seen and not flinching. He reached for her hand, slow and sure, and this time she didn't draw back. Their fingers twined together and the quiet between them held. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the porch rail. But inside, there was only the warmth of the fire and the sound of two hearts, steady and close. "I'm not leaving," she said. He looked at her like he'd known that already, but waited to hear it just the same. "Good." And that night, when they turned down the lamps and settled into the hush of the house, it was not as strangers under one roof, but as two people beginning something solid and lasting, built not from what they'd lost, but from what they were willing to grow. The wedding was quiet. Lorna stood beneath the cottonwood by the creek, the branches bare but strong, her hands folded tight around a small bundle of wild grass wrapped in twine. The preacher from town, a man with a crooked collar and gentle eyes, spoke soft and sure, his words nearly lost in the wind. Heath wore his good coat, the one with the patched elbow, and his boots were freshly brushed though still scuffed from years of use. He reached for her hand without hesitation when the time came. Her dress was made from unbleached muslin, simple, sturdy, and sewn by her own hand on the nights when sleep came slow. She had stitched a small line of blue thread into the hem, not for tradition, just because it pleased her to know it was there. After the final words were spoken and the preacher rode off, they stood beside each other without speaking. She let her head rest against Heath's shoulder, and he didn't move, didn't speak, only placed his hand at her back, fingers anchoring her like roots. They didn't throw a gathering or announce it in town. There was no one to tell but the hills, the sky, and the house that had waited for them both. That winter, they shared the work evenly. Lorna kept the books for the store 2 days each week and spent the rest tending the hens, curing meat, and mending gear with a hand that had grown steadier with purpose. Heath worked the cattle and repaired the barn roof after a heavy snowfall split 2 beams. He never asked her to stay in. She never asked him to slow down. One evening, she took apart the spare room's old frame and used the wood to build shelving for the front room. When Heath came in with snow along his collar, he ran his hand along the smooth edge and said, "That's better use than it ever had before." She stepped back, wiping her hands on her apron. "I thought it was time we filled the walls with things that belonged to both of us." In March, she found herself humming again, not from joy alone but from the rhythm of days that didn't ache. They rose early, drank coffee by the stove, and spoke in the small ways that filled a life what the mare was favoring in her step. How the wind shifted ahead of a storm, what seeds should go in that week. One late afternoon, Lorna stood in the field beside the fence, watching the sky stretch wide with the haze of early spring. Heath came up behind her, his coat open, the light catching in the lines around his eyes. "I've been thinking," he said. She turned slightly, still looking out at the land. "About what? If you'd want to plant a garden closer to the house, something permanent. We could mark it off before the ground sets," she nodded. "Yes, I'd like that." He touched her waist, gentle and sure. "I want to grow things with you." She leaned into him, not answering with words. She didn't need to. By summer, the garden was full, beans climbing the trellis, squash curling between rows, tomatoes heavy on the vine. Lorna's hands were browned from sun and soil, and she kept a straw hat looped over the porch rail. Heath built her a bench beneath the cottonwood, and in the evenings she sat there reading from a dog-eared book while he carved odd bits of wood into animals and tools. One morning, she woke before dawn and sat on the edge of their bed, pressing her palm low to her belly. The same stillness she'd felt once before was there, but this time it was warm, not cold. She didn't speak of it until supper. Heath had just set down his fork when she said, "I think there's a child coming." He didn't speak right away. He stood, rounded the table, and knelt beside her chair. Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. He said, "Then we make room, we raise them strong, we raise them loved." She nodded once, unable to speak. He rested his head against her side, where the life inside her had only just begun to stir. By the time the leaves turned again, the cradle he built sat beneath the window. It was smooth and simple, with her blue thread sewn into the lining. Heath carried water and firewood without being asked, and Lorna's days slowed as her body changed. She gave birth on a cold night in early December, with Mrs. Tully holding her hand and Heath pacing the porch, his boots never leaving the worn boards. When the cry came, sharp and new, he stepped inside. Lorna was pale but smiling, her arms full of their daughter. "Her name is Clara," she said. He sat beside them, took the child in his arms and said nothing at all, just held her. The house was no longer quiet. It breathed now with wind in the chimney, with the creak of the rocking chair, with the soft weight of a child's sigh in the dark. They never left. They never needed to. Years passed. Clara grew tall like her father, quick like her mother, and always with dirt on her knees from the garden. Lorna taught her letters at the table while bread rose on the stove. Heath showed her how to mend a broken latch and read the shape of a cloud before rain. One spring morning, Lorna stood on the porch watching her daughter run barefoot through the grass, and Heath came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You still glad you stayed?" he asked, voice rough with sleep. She leaned back into him, her smile quiet. "Every day." And she was. Because the life they built wasn't loud or grand, but it was whole. It was theirs, and it would last.